Well, welcome. Oh, I can't hear myself. Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about. There we go. Now I can hear myself. And you are about to attain true gnosis. Rabbi Tavai Singer. So we were just with each other last night in
That's right.
Jerusalem, and it was a surreal moment. And I decided that I wanted to get you on it live while I'm in my hotel room at your house, and let's just talk about the history of this city a little bit. Um, I got so I want if we can start off with you telling me the story, the bit, sort of like how what we talked about last night, but let's like recap it for a live audience on this chat right here. Before I even start though, I want to play a quick little clip that I got just on my phone, not on any good cameras or anything. Just a quick little clip that I got from last night, and then we'll talk about the history of Jerusalem and some other things as well. I say hi to my Facebook friends as well. Wow. so I
So
want
tell me this. I know you're interviewing me, and I've never done this, but I'm going to ask you, tap into it. What did it feel like for you being in this holy place?
I felt an energy there that was unmatched anywhere else I've ever seen. There was just this vibe of people who are, they are. This is their. How do I say this? You can tell that they really felt the presence of God, and they were there. Really, this is what they weren't just for show. This was a serious place. The vibes were just through the roof with people who were emotional. Some were crying, some were singing, some were hymning, some were, you know, just nodding their heads, and it was like, and that's what I felt when I was there. So it was pretty intense. It was pretty intense, and I want to ask you, how do we get to this spot where we have a place like this, where there's a giant wall and people 24 hours a day, 7 days a week
Right.
there doing what we just saw? How do we get there?
So there are two things that are happening there that create that extraordinary spiritual vortex. And it's the past and the future coming together. That's what's happening. And it's why it gyrates for people, regardless of their religious affiliation. It just the place spins at such a frequency because two things are happening simultaneously. We didn't go to a place that just is a relic of the past, which it is. You saw the western wall of the second temple, right, of the superstructure, a wall that's holding up an entire mountain. But that place is not only very striking remnant of the second temple, it's also a promise. You're looking at a living people, a nation that's returned back. No other nation after 2,000 years of exile have ever returned back to the land. That's never happened in history. Nothing remotely resembling that. We're not the only nation that's been exiled from a land. Many people have, but eventually they lose their identity, whether the Viscoffs or the Philistines, you're not here
Not
anymore. But for the nation of Israel to return back to the land, to return back to Jerusalem, that means that there is also a destiny, and there's a promise that was fulfilled. There was an IOU note, right? Jeremiah 30, verse 3, if you want to open it. It's a restoration of the people of a promise, and God said, "You're gonna get I'm gonna bring you back there." And then we're here, we've returned back to the land, and, just as it's promised. So therefore, everything merges together, and for people, all of us, many people there who weren't Jewish, we were just drawn to this day, to this place. It says in Jeremiah, "Ki hinei yamim boyam nom Hashem," the days are coming, saith the Lord. And Jeremiah, for the viewers, lived during a really bad time. He lived at the time when the first temple was destroyed. He served a prophet for 41 years. And he's saying this about the future. "V'shavti yeshivus ami Yisrael v'Yehuda amar Hashem," and I'll restore you back to this place. I'm bringing you back home.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. So it's a restoration of a people. It really is Ezekiel's vision of a valley of dried bones. Like, who would think? Like, who would think that a nation that rose from the ashes of the Holocaust to restore back to, that's what Jerusalem is. It's past
Yeah.
and future coming together.
Let me ask you this. So you showed me yesterday some remnants of the first temple period, which I didn't even know there was even there.
Right,
And it's
right.
really, really, really far underground because
Mm,
it's basically built on top. The second temple is basically built on top of the first. I
right,
think so, right? Yeah. And like you can look down at this giant hole tunnel in the ground, and you can
right,
see like these old ancient stone blocks,
right,
just mind blowing stuff. And then you see the next layer, and then you see the Byzantines came in, and you see all the Roman Corinthian columns. You mentioned last night how they, when they dug up the Corinthian columns of the streets of the Romans, they kept it there. They didn't destroy it; they kept it there. Why
right.
did they want to do that?
Right, right. And in contrast, when the Muslims conquered the land of Israel from from the Christians, they destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I mean, they destroyed it till there wasn't even a grain of sand. There was nothing left of it. And I grant the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built on top of a temple, probably to Apollo or to Jupiter, but we don't. We preserve the past, and you know why we preserve it? We watched these columns from the Roman Empire. And literally, it's not a remake, and the reason is that imagine going back 2,000 years and telling the Jews who are being exiled that one day you will return, and old men and old women will be walking the streets of Jerusalem, and children will play here, and the empire will be gone. There's no Roman Empire. They're gone. If you want to learn about the Roman Empire, you go to a library and read about it. So here we've returned. That's why we're preserving history, because the history and the archaeology tell a story, a very tangible story. You see, it's not like me
Yeah,
coming on air, but here, look at our history, see it. We have returned and the empire is gone. The Roman Empire, the most powerful empire ever in history, for so long. It was unimaginable they would be defeated. And now they don't exist. They only exist in relics, but the people are gone. But the nation of Israel is here. We
yeah,
did this together. Just we filmed this. We did this together. Where I showed you there were little pebbles on top of those pillars. Yeah,
yes.
right. So those pillars of the Roman Empire. The street, and we'll go back there again to
Can
film
you
part
tell
of
them?
it.
Can you tell them what that means? And by the way, thank you, vaguely agnostic, for the birthday, for the happy birthday in the super chat. Appreciate that, really do. Thank you for that. But can you tell them the pebbles on top of the Roman columns, beautiful Roman columns in the
Right,
middle of a beautiful street, and
right,
there's pebbles on. How do you get pebbles on top of that? Can you tell them why that's
right.
there?
So what you look down on, and we'll go back again because we're now both in Jerusalem. We'll go back again. So what you saw there is the Cardo, the large street going through Jerusalem from the Roman Empire. There are two of them running like that through Jerusalem, and then there are these pillars that I don't know what they're like 20 feet tall or something. The mass. So we can go down there, and we'll do this another time. And little children have a game, and the game is to take a pebble and throw it up, and so that it lands on top of the pillars, right? and
Right.
if you land it, so then you win. And why are they doing that? Well, there's a very powerful message there because in Zechariah chapter 8, verse 4, it says that one day, says the Lord, that men and women of old age will sit in the streets of Jerusalem and they'll walk with their canes because of their old age. And then verse 5, the streets of Jerusalem will be filled with little boys and little girls playing there. What a message. And again, Zechariah is writing this during the Persian Empire. There's really this it's not like like I can predict today that Iran is gonna have a revolution to count. Well, we're watching it, so it's easy to see. This is would have been unimaginable in time. So therefore, children play and land the pebble on top of the Roman pillars because we're back and God fulfilled his promise. And it's also very striking. We'll go back down the street, and we're gonna go down there. But so part of that street has been paved over and fixed over, but the Israeli government very deliberately left many of these stones from 2,000 years ago in there. So you're gonna actually step on stone that was pavement that's 2,000 years old. And we'll do that again because we're going to go back and film more. So
Yeah.
the point is, we have returned. That's it. We're a living
Yeah.
testimonial to that, right?
Now I noticed because today I went to the Garden of Gethsemane, and it's
Right,
right across the road from where the wall and the temple, and then the
right.
temple, and it's in between it is the Kidron Valley or Valley of Jehoshaphat,
Mhm.
and so I'm sitting over there, and there's Christians everywhere flocking to see this garden. There's a church built right next to it. Nice,
Right,
beautiful built
right,
Roman Byzantine style, with the images of Mary and the standardized Catholic looking church. And so I even I even went in there and took some pictures inside there, and it was pretty cool. And I noticed that there's a vibe as well, even with the Christians who don't
right.
have any claim necessarily to this land, but they just know that their Messiah was here and he died here. So they flock here, and this is this is holy to them too. What do you feel about how do you feel about that? Because I know
Did
you're
you
very strong about
Yeah.
go ahead.
How many churches did you see there? There's quite a few, weren't there?
Yeah, there was a bunch.
Because there's a whole bunch of Garden of Gethsemane's there.
Yeah, they showed us a couple different ones.
Right. So, no, I'm not so actually most of those churches are fairly young, like they're 100, years old. They're not very old at all. And there are a whole bunch of Last Supper rooms. I think there are about 5 of them, 5 places where the Last Supper was the putative Last Supper took place, and so what they want to do is they want to place it there, but in fact, these are relative. The earliest stuff that the Christians have are 4th century. Actually, while the Council of Nicaea was going on in 325, at the very same time, Helena, the mother of Constantine, was in Israel the exact same time. She was in Israel saying, this is where, Jesus was crucified. This is where this occurred. This is where that occurred. And then they built churches on each of those places. So that's all 4th century. Um, so, how do I feel about it? I'm looking forward to a time when all the nations will speak in a pure speech. And I'm happy that Christians are here to enjoy it. But you're on the Mount of Olives, which is Zechariah chapter 14. So the Christians have good taste. I mean, that's where the Messiah is supposed to come from, is right there in from the Mount of Olives, heading due west and
Yeah,
entering into the gates of mercy, which are sealed, which are
yeah.
sealed.
Let me
They're
ask you this.
closed.
Let me
Yeah.
jump in for a second because you made that's a point that I want to explore. Because I'm on top of the other side of that hill, looking
Mhm.
at the Temple Mount today,
Right.
and down all going down that hill, facing the wall on the Temple Mount, is thousands of graves and boned ossuaries. On the top is the Hebrew Israelite section, the Jewish section. And then below that, there seems to be I think a Islamic section, and then on the bottom it seems like there's a Christian section. Where did this idea? So they're all waiting for something. Is that what they are? They want their graves to be as closest to the temple as possible because they're awaiting the coming of the Messiah, or the Christians think second coming, maybe, or Christians and
Right.
Muslims. Yeah,
So this is very explicit.
yeah,
Zechariah 14 very explicitly says that the Messiah is going to come into Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, which will part him. It's explicit. It's not. There's no inferences there. So the Mount of Olives is very important, and to be buried there, according to tradition, is this is will be the first of the resurrection. Will be the Mount of Olives. In fact, I don't there are very few graves left, but if someone wanted to be buried there today, it would probably cost around $75,000 to acquire a grave there. And the estimates are there are hundreds of thousands of people buried there. So you people are very aware of the sanctity of that place because that place is very specifically marked off at the very end of Zechariah. Zechariah, just so viewers know, the last half of Zechariah is all messianic. There's there's a Muslim cemetery, strangely, that was placed right in front of the Gates of Mercy. So I don't know if you saw it from where you were standing. You I don't know if it was visible, the gates of mercy, the Shar Harachamim. So those gates were sealed by Suleiman the Magnificent, who built the walls. The walls that you see are all from 1535 to 1542. There are segments which I pointed out to you that go back to Herod, even some to the Maccabean period. They're much older, but after he built the gates of mercy where the original was, he then was informed that the Jews expect their Messiah to come through. So two things were done. One, the gate, the Shire, was sealed up, was blocked off with stone. And the second thing was a Muslim cemetery was then put there. That's right in front of the wall, right in front of the southern, of the easternmost wall, opposite the western wall. And the thought behind that was that the Messiah can't become contaminated and go into a cemetery. I cannot go into a cemetery as a priest. Like if I was with you today, we were together last night, but if I were with you today, I wouldn't be able to walk into the Mount of Olives because I can't come near. So they put a cemetery that to sort of act as a barrier for the Jewish version of the Messiah. But of course, the Messiah is a not a priest, therefore coming into contact with a dead body would not be an issue for him. So it was kind of a silly thing to do. So you have the Jewish area, and you have Christians have a section as well. That's where Oscar Schindler is buried, right there. And then you have the Muslim part, which is really not on the Mount of Olives, but on the right up
yeah,
on Mount Moriah, right?
yeah. It's like you see three domes, like 3 points: the Christian,
R-
Muslim, and Jewish.
Right. There are 3 points that come into view. This is the holiest place on earth for for many people. It's a vortex for everyone who I think. I mean, when you ask people anywhere you are, what's the holiest place on earth? Like people generally would say, like Jerusalem. Like, what is the holy city? Like people would say Jerusalem. I think, right? It's not like
Seems
yeah,
seems pretty legit, you know.
right.
Um, so let me ask you this: after 70 A.D., first of all, I noticed this today. Me and Derek were talking about this. Jesus says that no stone will lay on top of another stone, but the Western Wall's still there.
Right.
So he's kind of wrong on that one. I never thought about that. But that's not even what I want to ask you about. I want to ask you about this. After 70 AD, the temple falls, but it seems like there's still Jews living there for another 50, 60 years until the next revolt, the Bar Kokhba revolt. And then it seems like they get kicked out and the Romans take over for it. They change the name of the city to Aelia Capitolona. And during that time period, you have like a good 1,000 years go by, or no longer than that. You have a long time goes by. How does the people of Israel, the Jews, how do they keep their traditions alive? What was how does that even work?
Because we live it. Because, like I told you, I can't go into a cemetery because my father's a priest and my grandfather is. So it's a part of my life. Every day of the week in the synagogue, I remove my shoes as a priest and I stand in front of the congregation every single morning. I turn my face to them and I put a shawl over my face and I bless them with the words of Numbers chapter 6, with the Aaronic benediction. And they who are not priests are there and just say Amen, reciting this. So every day, my father, my grandfather, going all the way back to the time of the Torah, did this, and we recite precisely that formula. So every aspect of our lives as religious Jews is guided by the Torah. It's not like some idea that we just a series of beliefs, but we live it. It's part of our lives. And one of the things I point out is we just don't change. We talked last night about how there are Jews who are dressed a little differently. Like I'm wearing a typical Western shirt, and you saw Hasidic Jews who are dressed in white and black, but we believe the exact same thing. So we try to we all wear a kippah on our head, but essentially we believe the same thing. Like we don't have anything remotely resembling what the church has, like Calvinism, a pope, or Catholicism, Orthodox, which have really different beliefs. You have Unitarians and Trinitarians. There's nothing remotely resembling that among religious Jews. No matter what we look like and how striking, it's all the same. So that's how we preserve it, and we have a belief that God promised us that we would never be destroyed. He would preserve a remnant of us. And that's described in Zephaniah 3:12 through 16. And we believe we're living as a testimony to the text, and the text testifies to us. It's a bilateral relationship.
Yeah. Derek from Myth Vision podcast, who's right down the hall from me right now, says, "How does it feel to only be on, How does it feel to be only a few football fields away from hell? We have so much content, it's nuts. We went to the wall with Tobiah last night." I think he's talking about the dung gate, right? They call that hell, right?
No, the Gehenna would
Gehenna.
be right. So that's not Dungate. The excuse me, Gehenna, the valley of Hinnom is down the Kidron Valley, which is very famous. I mean, Abraham came there with Isaac. I mean, this is like spectacular. We were only out for a couple of hours last night, and we didn't stop for a second. You can see that stuff up, and we'll go back because that's very. So there is a place that's called Gehenna, which is hell. And what? So the question is, among scholars, which came first? Is Gehenna is the name for hell, Gehenna? And then because this is a place where so many dead bodies were thrown during wars, they then call that Gehenna. Ge means a valley. Or is it the verse like which came first, the chicken or the egg? So that's the valley you're looking at. According to our tradition, this is a place where just dead bodies were. So that name of hell became associated with it. Dung Gate is mentioned in the Bible. It's mentioned in Ezekiel, for instance. It's not the same Dung Gate. And just so your viewers know that really the ancient old city of Jerusalem goes much further south than Dung Gate. Are you going tomorrow to the
Yes.
city of David? I don't
Yes.
know.
We're
Yeah,
going
okay.
there and we're going to see the Gehenna.
Okay, so you're going to the city of David. That's going to blow your mind away. That is the archaeologically, besides the Temple Mount, which you can dig there. That's archaeologically the most important place, the most richest place, and you're descending back thousands of years to the time when King David came to defeat the Jebusites and sent his soldier in, and the waterways that Hezekiah built, and you're going into you can't even imagine what's ahead of you in the city of David tomorrow. And you're going to see all that. You're going to see where the king's palaces were. And we have the coinage from it where, oh, certainly King David, they'll tell you that King David almost certainly stood there when he saw Bathsheba. He was looking off that valley. That's where the king's palaces were. So that's all south of the old today's old city. Remember what I told you, that the walls of the old city today are 500 years old, from the 16th century. Like, like that just as old as going back to the Reformation. It's not that old by Jewish time, but you're going a little further south outside the wall. But in the ancient time, the old city went much, much further south, and you're going to the city of David. And that's what Jeremiah, when he was thrown into quicksand and a black slave rescued him, that's where it happened. I mean, you're going into the Bible. I mean, you're literally going in. That's like, right. Yeah,
Here's
that's
a good
intense.
here's a good question from somebody. Thank you for the question. Do you think they'll ever rebuild the temple?
Yes, of course. Of course.
Now let's so since we're on this topic, what needs to
Mm,
be done as far as scripture and all that? What needs
mm.
to be done? Why don't they just build it tomorrow? What's the
Oh,
you know what I
you
mean?
need the Messiah to come, you
Okay.
know? And what's funny is I have as you all I think those who view my shows, my interviews know that I have a lot of Muslim viewers. Muslims tell me they're if the Messiah comes and it's the Jewish fine, build it. They're happy about that. That's fine. But the temple being rebuilt is are not only occupy the last three passages of Ezekiel 37. You all know that. That's the valley of dry bones. That's how it ends. That there'll be temple be rebuilt, and then all the nations will know that I am God. So what we need is the coming of the Messiah, the Mashiach to come, and then there'll be complete world peace and the unused um, floor plan, the unused blueprints of what that temple will look like is described in 9 chapters of Ezekiel, from Ezekiel 40 through 48. That's the third temple. So we have copious information of precisely how large it is, how many windows. It's really all there. It's for everyone to see. So very much so. We await that.
Now, what is the Messiah supposed to do? What is his objective?
So his objective is to rebuke the nations. That means to be the grand teacher. This is Isaiah chapter 2, verse 1 through 4. Just right there, very plain that he's going to rebuke the nations. He's going to, always is a teacher. Of course, he's a scion from the house of David and King Solomon. He's a direct descendant. So he comes from that line, which is preserved. I have friends from the house of David. My great grandmother was from the house of David. Uh, anyway, Gamliel, house of David. So he will come to a nation and then tell the world to repent. It will be preceded by the coming of Elijah the prophet. That's how the book of Malachi ends. He ushers that in, and nations will listen to him, and they will turn their implements of war, swords and spears, into pruning hooks and plowshares. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn of war anymore. That means if someone claims to be the Messiah and not everyone believes him, that means he can't be the Messiah. That's I don't know if you get that part. I mean, if most of the world does not believe that Jesus is the Messiah, then he can't be the Messiah because that's the whole point. So
And
there's no miracle working. There's
right, I
nothing like that.
and if you're if you're an atheist, you're hearing this, you should be saying fair enough, fair enough. Don't make if prove it then for Christianity, it's all about hey, this verse says this, and don't you believe it? Why don't you believe it? Oh, Satan's telling you not to believe it. What you're saying is don't even you don't have to do anything. You're just going to believe it because it's going to be shown to
Right.
you. So
Right.
it's like,
E
okay,
right,
fair enough.
exactly.
See when we see
It's
it.
it's locked up. That's why Jews don't get crazy. You need
Right.
to accept the Messiah. You never in a mil never in your life as a Jew came over to, "You need to accept the Messiah," because it's ridiculous. The point is that when the true Messiah comes, I'm not gonna have to do that. It actually says that in Jeremiah 31, verse 33, "In those days, no one will have to teach anyone about God, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares the Lord." Christians like to point to Jeremiah 31 where it talks about I'll bring a new covenant, but they don't keep reading that in those days no one is going to have to teach anyone about God. So he's not a miracle. That means, look, he might do miracles, but there's not one word in Tanakh specifically the Messiah will perform any miracle. Now, those of you who've not read the Gospels, it's basically front loaded with miracles. It's all over the place. If you want to avoid the miracle, go to the Gospel of Thomas, probably older text, or go to Q Source, which probably predates the Gospels. But It's interesting that Luke in chapter 4, verse 18, had to insert healing the blind as something the Messiah is supposed to do, which isn't in the original text in Isaiah 61. Why did he have to insert it? Because there's no mention of healing blind or making, no, there's nothing like that. So we're not looking for a miracle worker. He might do miracles, maybe. I don't know. It's not in the text. No one's thinking that way.
Yeah, and speaking of all these miracles and stuff, in the Talmud, there's passages about Jesus being a sorcerer. And let me ask you this: Is this the Talmudic Jesus? Is there anybody in rabbinic Judaism who thinks this is a different Jesus? Is this really the Jesus from the Gospels? Same
Mm.
guy.
This is a big, big argument among in all areas. I mean, both in the Jewish religious world and the secular academic world, of whether the Jesus in the Talmud is the Jesus of Christianity. My view is that it isn't, but that's not the general consensus.
Okay.
Now, I need to just add something in. So, because I don't explain this to the viewers, they're going to be confused. So, the Talmud was literally the Talmud, which is the largest text of antiquity. The Talmud was put on trial numerous times, very famously in France in 1242, in the summer of 1242. And the Talmud was being charged with the crime of blasphemy because there are things about Jesus and Mary in there that are not complimentary. Okay. The chief defense in France at the time was the time of St. Louis IX. Like if you live in St. Louis, Missouri, your city was named after this terrible anti Semite. In any case, the Talmud was put on trial for blasphemy, and the rabbis who had to defend the Talmud stated that the Jesus in the Talmud is just not the same person. And so, if you look at the dating of when these stories are pinned on, they're either first century BC or second century. But I don't think that dating is accurate. I think this is the Jesus of Christianity because it's so strange. Like, why is this guy so important? And why is his conception so important? Like, was his mother a harlot, as is in the Talmud, or was he born to a virgin? And this is what struck me, Neil, years ago. I started thinking, isn't this interesting? The Christians say that Jesus did not have a human Jewish father, right? And the Talmud says that his father was a Roman soldier named Pondero Pantera. We actually know where his grave is. Now, what's a Roman soldier doing there? So all of Jerusalem, imagine, was filled where you are, filled with Roman soldiers, was under Roman occupation since Pompeii, since 66 BC. So I thought to myself, this is so striking. This is so
Right.
weird. Like, that means, according to everybody, Jesus was not conceived of a mommy and daddy who were both Jewish. And it went bang, there it is. That's what I thought, realized in my mind that the earliest Christian literature, um, Paul and Mark, there's no mention of Joseph. And I realized immediately Joseph was completely invented to cover this. And that's why only in Mark's gospel, Mark 6:3, is Jesus is the carpenter, is the tecton, not Joseph. And everywhere else it is. It all fell into place. So I think that this is the Jesus of Christianity. Although if you look at Jewish apologetics, now apologetics, that means that they're trying to just stop Christians from killing us. So they said that, no, this is a different person. I think the texts were changed. That means we self-censored them so that Christians don't kill us all. And then people started repeating that. But there is a disagreement over that. But the consensus is, scholarly consensus on this, is
It's
that
a
it was
Jesus.
a Jesus Christian.
Right.
Yeah.
And
That's the general
I just want
consensus.
to
Yeah.
mention this too, because I think so too. To me, it's not even a. To me, this is ridiculous that people are. What are the odds? Just seriously think about this. What are the chances? One in, I don't know. Let's see. That there's two different people, both named Jesus, both from Nazareth, both of a mother named Mary, who is claimed to have been an adulterer and not have a. And there's some like.
Oh, I'm going to take you tight.
And
I'm going to take you.
even
Yeah.
more than that. Hold on, let me finish.
Yeah.
He's hung on Israel. He's hung in Jerusalem. Excuse me. He's hung on Passover Eve in Jerusalem
Right.
for leading Israel astray. For So,
Right.
what are the chances? What are the odds that there's two of those? Now, I've heard this told to me too, that the Alexander Jannaeus thing, one of them is what you said, that there was so much persecution by the Romans in the church, and even in France and stuff. They had to fix this text somehow. That's
Of
fine.
course.
I get that. That's possible. That's not doubtable. Some people call it a conspiracy theory. Okay, whatever. I've heard someone else point out to me that Alexander Jannaeus is the last remnant of the Maccabees who set up the Sanhedrin, which was passed down to the Herodian dynasty. So the Sanhedrin is who executed. They went through the trial of Jesus. So they could be talking about his government in that sense. But that might be. What do you think about that? And then go ahead, say what you were going to say about what I was going to blow
All
our
right.
line.
So the key thing is exactly what you mentioned. Everything falls on Nazareth. I mean, the present day city of Nazareth is not Nazareth. It's not ancient Nazareth. And I'm not an archaeologist, but archaeologists feel pretty certain that they found the ancient city of Nazareth, which is a nothing of a town, a one horse town. Nazareth is never mentioned in Talmud, never mentioned Tanakh, not mentioned anywhere. It's really nothing. So who would invent this? And I think mythicists sees this and popularize this whole idea. But what I did was I said, I need to go to the primary sources. As it turns out, the oldest surviving complete Talmud, more than 70 volumes, is called the Munich manuscript. It dates back to the 13th century, I think the 13th century. And if you go to these texts, which now
Wow.
say
Just
just
hold on.
deep,
That alone
yeah,
is a good point because you now we know if that's the oldest text.
that's
So
the
many,
oldest complete text.
so
They're
many
much
things
older than
could
that.
have been changed. Go ahead.
Right. So if we go back, I mean, so we're going back to the medieval period, we then find wherever it says just Jesus now, just Yeshu without any modifier, it actually says Yeshu Hanotzri, Jesus of Nazareth. So that's forget it. That's done. So in today's Talmud, it doesn't say Jesus of Nazareth, but if we go back, we actually have older texts of the Talmud that go back even to the ninth century where it says Jesus of Nazareth. So very clearly, the Nazareth part was taken out.
So
Was
we have evidence of changing of
oh,
Jesus.
we had to change it. Just a piece of
I
history
I,
for the
I
viewers.
agree. I agree.
Babylon so the Talmud really covers a period of about 700 years, from 200 BCE till 500 CE, but it's codified, edited finally in 500 in Babylon. What's very important is in Babylon in 500, it was a Sasanian empire. That means there were almost no Christians there. Christians certainly had no influence. So imagine in 500, when the Talmud is completely edited and codified, Jews then could care less about Christianity, and they were worried about Christians because there were almost no Christians there. Certainly, Christians had no power there. But as the 8th century, ninth century, Christianity is moving east, its power is moving east. So at some point, Jews are going, holy smokes, we've got this text that they're going to just kill us all. So of course they would censor it so that, you know, just to prevent them from getting killed. So that's almost certainly what happened. I mean, it all makes sense. The original Talmud, they didn't care about Christians, but by the 10th, 11th century, fine. And then there's this Jew named Nicholas Donin. He's a Jew who converted to Christianity. He blows the lid off this.
Yeah, and I mythicists will die on this hill that there's no way this is the same guy. And to me, it sounds delusional. And I know some really, really smart people who just they can't get over this Janaeus thing. They just see it as like different Jesus. And I'm just like, think about this. Can you think about all these specific details about this guy that are in this text, and the chances of there be two of these people doing all the same stuff is literally impossible. And I got a super chat that I want to bring up from Lev
Yeah.
Polyakov. Thank you, Lev, for this super chat. Lev's also Jewish as well, and he's a friend of mine who has a channel called Break the Rules. And he says, "Tremendous to see Neil with the great Rabbi Singer. Would be an
Mhm.
honor to have you on Break the Rules soon." He wants to have you on, Rabbi. He was talking to me about this. He asked me to ask you. You don't have to answer that now. We'll talk about it. But he has a cool channel. He likes to have people on for debates, discussions, and maybe we can get you hooked up with him someday. But thank you for that super chat, Lev. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, so back to what we were saying. Um, yeah. So any last thoughts on this on the Jesus of the Talmud that we left out.
Right, you're right. So what you see is so here's what this is what I think what you're saying is so insightful. So it's interesting that if we self-censor it, which it's clearly we self-censor because the text today has clearly not the text of ancient scrolls Talmud. I've lectured at universities around the world where they would have me as the speaker and they would take me like to Penn State or to Oxford. They would take me into their libraries where they have these texts from the 10th century. Where you could see the codex. It's not even a codex; it's often a scroll more than a codex, and you could see the actual stuff. So if you go back, the entire Munich manuscript is online. I mean, it's all there. You don't need me for that. So it's very clear it's been altered. It's very clear. But here's what you said that's so interesting, but they left enough information, there's enough residual information in the current text to wink. It's a dog whistle to say, look, this is the Jesus of Christianity, but we have plausible deniability. It's not, because the stories are all weird. Every one of those stories that are about Jesus and Mary, there's some strange hook in it that is different. But there's enough of it there, as you said, Neil, that no, this is definitely the Jesus of Christianity. So it satisfies both the desire to of plausible deniability. That's not Jesus Christianity. You can't blame us, you know. And on the other hand, it's for the Jews to know this is the Jesus of Christianity. You see, it's absolutely a brilliant system. The plausible deniability and the dog whistle simultaneously. That's what's really going on there.
Don't you think if Jesus, like now, I want to get into some because mythicists. I think this Talmud Jesus kind of defeats mythicism because don't you think if this really was just never, this guy never existed, this is all made up, this is all just mythology, don't you think the Jewish historians would know this? Don't you think they would say, we don't know who this guy is, this is just made up by somebody?
Right.
But they don't do that. They acknowledge that he lived, but they also have their, they're like, no, he didn't do this, he didn't do that, nor is he the Messiah, and he's definitely not God. So don't you think that would be the case?
Right. So it would be the lazy way for Jews to combat Christianity as a spiritual opponent. Christianity's always had an adversarial relationship with Jews, and it's in the Gospels. Like we didn't start it, they did. But right, so mythicism would be the laziest way to respond to because if Jesus didn't exist, then there's no point
It's
in even
over.
moving on. I mean, it's over. Then it doesn't make a difference what you have. Isaiah 53, Daniel 9, Isaiah, do anything you want to. But if he never existed, then we don't have to have an in-depth conversation about the text. Now, what I think is mythicists are hanging on to things that are very striking, like we don't have non-Christian texts about Jesus because Jesus is his popularity is exaggerated in the Gospels, so you can't use the Gospel. So when the Gospels describe in early Mark, we find in the other Gospels as well that there's this fellow who is a paralytic, and he's brought in to a house with Jesus, but he can't even get in because there's so many crowds around the house. They have to get on the roof and then lower him down through the roof because he can't get into the front door. Massive crowd. So Mark is conveying that everyone is marveling at this miracle worker, right? So, right, if you're looking for so if you're saying that's the model, he's that popular, thousands of people are waving palm branches as he's coming through. Well, yeah, but it wasn't that. It was how many people, followers? Not many. So that's why it's not in the literature. Moreover, one other point, you know, um, the the lack of evidence about history is not evidence that the history didn't exist. We have just such a tiny, minuscule amount of information from the ancient world. There's nothing survived, almost nothing, unless it was in Egypt. Nag Hammadi, of course, it's in Egypt. Of course, it's going to survive. Dead Sea, it's all arid. You're going there. It's total desert. So very little survives. So I think it's a silly way to do this. I think um, I understand what they're doing, but it's not a part of Jewish tradition that he didn't exist at all. And it would have been the easy way to say he just never existed. Right.
And that's a
Absolutely.
good point. Now, I was in the north before I came down here to Jerusalem. And up there, it's just it seems like, as far as archaeology goes, as far as the dig sites go, very Hellenized. especially Caesarea Maritime. You see the columns, you see the bathtubs, you see the mosaics,
Oh, yeah.
you see the Medusa heads, you see mosaics of Orpheus with his lyre,
Mhm.
Dionysus, you
Right.
name it, satyrs, centaurs, and this is where Jesus grew up. Like we're talking about, we were in the neighborhood, Sepphoris, Nazareth area, and we're in that neighborhood, and we're looking around, and everything is just Hellenized. There's a
Right.
theater where they probably had plays, Greek plays
Amphitheater,
going on.
right?
Do you think it's
Hippodrome.
possible? Yeah, do you think it's possible that Jesus was a Hellenized man, not a not a Orthodox Jew, maybe? Or what do you think about that?
You know the problem. The problem is that I have no non-Christian sources
Right.
to support that. So so everybody is using presuppositions of verisimilitude. That means everybody is just saying, okay, he's probably was an Orthodox Jew, Pharisee, same thing, and he's coming from a fishing village in the north, and he was a completely Orthodox Jew, but saying that the empire is a bad thing. Fine, but you have to presuppose that. You have to buy
Yeah.
that. You can, it's fine, but that's all it is. It's a presupposition. Think about this? Tiberius, no Jew was allowed into in the first century. Tiberias was a completely Roman city where people spoke Greek. Really, really was. And therefore, the Jews made it. It's not that the Romans didn't allow Jews into Tiberias. No, the city is named after an emperor. No Jew was allowed to go in by the Jews because it was a forbidden city. It's like you can't go to Las Vegas. I remember when I was in rabbinical school and I drove cross country, we were forbidden to ever drive to Las Vegas in crossing the country. Why? Because it's a sin city. So that was Tiberius, no Jew. Now, what happens is by the third century, after the destruction of the temple, actually even second century, Jews start moving to the north because we're thrown out of Jerusalem, and their great institutions of study are in the north. So what you have is exactly what you witnessed a montage, a mixture, a homogenization of Hellenism, even in synagogues. I'm sure you saw synagogues with the mosaic tiling of Greco gods and so on, and astrology all mixed together. But that wasn't everywhere. There were certainly synagogues that were facing Jerusalem, that there are none of these relics because these people were strict Pharisees. If we are to take Matthew 23, where the Pharisees, we are told, are sitting in the seat of Moses. Their authority is the gold standard. So then we can, because there's kind of a criteria of embarrassment because the New Testament is so anti-Pharisaic. Instead, that's the thinking. So it's a cool thinking, and it fits well. So if we do that, so we would expect to find Orthodox synagogues. Please, if you're a Reformed Jew, don't be offended by this, but I'll say this. So in the United States, you have Reformed temples, okay? But why do they have an organ in their synagogues, right? Why do the rabbis wear these, what looks like a priest's robe? Why do they do that? Why do they have how did an organ ever get into these? Because they copied it from the Christians in Germany and then imported it, right? I mean, they know that this is not a conspiracy. They all will say, yeah, we copied it from the Christians. So, what you see in the reform movement of organs, that's a Christian innovation to have that. Just
Yeah.
Orthodox synagogue would never have that in a million years. So, it's the same thing. It was importing ideas that were out there and then bringing it in.
Yeah, we found two. I'm looking for the images. We found two of these mosaics. These are obviously in the north of Helios on them. We also
Mm.
found stuff like this with sarcophaguses with gorgons on them. And so it was just, it was just kind of interesting. We're in Israel and we're seeing all this stuff. I do have a super chat that I want to get to, but real quick before we get to that, we went to Benias, and this is underneath Mount Hermon, one of the candidates for the place of the transfiguration, where supposedly, according to the text, Jesus, Elijah, and Moses were there, and Peter and John and James saw them all. And that's it's not mentioned in the Bible. It's one of the unknowns, but it's one of the candidates along with Mount Tabor. But underneath that is a grotto with a shrine and temple dedicated to Pan. and they dug it up, and it goes back to the time of Alexander the Great's conquest. And so that's been there the whole time. Even when Jesus was alive, that was there. So if that really was the mountain, why that mountain? That's interesting.
The
Um,
same reason for the Church of Holy Sepulchre is on um, a a temple to Apollo. I mean, there's this disagreement of which god, but the Greek gods, they chose
right,
those.
and right next to it. I'm not mean I don't mean like a mile away, or I'm talking like you can throw a stone and hit it. From there is the temple dedicated to Augustus by Heron, and inside there is all types of sculptures of goddesses like Hygeia. There's there's Serapis columns, and it's
Right,
completely pagan over there. But
right.
there you go. On top of that, Mount Hermon is a different stuff. And so some people have pointed out that on top is heaven and on bottom is hell, because that temple and the pan thing is all on the bottom.
Right.
So it's interesting. It's an interesting dichotomy there.
Well, Christianity imported the Greco-Roman paganism. That was it. That was the big deal. Besides Judaism, aside from Judaism, there were no monotheisms there. So they imported it. The Transfiguration, of course, is a complete invention, and that's why it's only used. You only appears in the Synoptic Gospels. Why? To make Jesus equal to Moses and Elijah.
That's pretty.
John's Christology, right? John's Christology is so high, he doesn't need Moses and Elijah. I don't need you anymore. I don't need Mary, and she'll never be mentioned. Right. So of course, what they did was they took. It's like Christmas. Like, what did they pick for Christmas? They're not going to pick like November 2nd. No, they're going to pick the day that the Roman Empire celebrated the Sol Invictus. So they took a pre-existing idolatry and just shifted it and just built on that, and then of course made it nice and Western, meaning nice and Greek rather than nasty looking like India or something. So they cleaned it up.
Yeah.
Right. It's exactly what's going on. Rome did not convert to Christianity. Christianity converted to Rome. And they did what the Greeks did. They didn't there was no gods that really came out of Greece. It was Greece simply imported the ideas that were in Babylon, Persia, and Africa, and then anesthetized, and then just cleaned it up and made it Greek. And that's what you're saying.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've noticed that. Well, that's a really good point. And John Mucker with the $10 super chat. Thank you so much for that. Is it possible that it isn't the same Jesus, but rather the Talmudic writers were simply recording supposed claims from Christian who were promulgating stories about Jesus decades after its inception?
Right. So the Jews in Babylon, so this is I'm speculating, but the evidence is all pointing the opposite direction, because in Babylon, the Jews would have no concern whatsoever about Christianity, about the Jesus movement. It just wasn't there. They knew what was going on in the empire, in the Roman Empire, but they were in the Sasanian Empire. It was Christianity. There were Christians there, but they were weak. So what would be the impetus for that? Uh,
Yeah, what's more
what
likely?
they're not
Like this
concerned.
is to me, this is Occam's razor. It's a lot easier just to see them talking about the same Jesus than it
And
is
it's
to be
all
able to.
over the place. It's
Yeah,
really there's a lot of sources, not just in the Talmud, the Midrashic literature. It really is many sources. And the Jews of Babylon were in a really good place. They were like living in the equivalent of the United States, like the five towns. They were living in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. They were like living good. The Jews, they knew and spoke about this in the Roman Empire, were an enormous amount of trouble. They knew and they were very concerned about it. But they were good because living in the Sasanian Empire, I mean, relatively speaking, Persian the Persians were, relatively speaking, very tolerant of Jews because we didn't really go to war with them. The Roman Empire had a lot of nasty stuff in it. Not only did we go to war with them a whole bunch of times, but then we Rome became Christian in after Constantine's conversion. By Theodosius, it's the official religion of the empire. That's by the end by 379. So the Roman Empire was extremely hostile to Jews and Judaism, although Judaism was a legal religion. It was but in Babylon, no, there was Jews
right.
relatively. It wasn't the picnic, it wasn't the cakewalk, as some people represent it to be, but it was relatively excellent.
That makes a lot of sense because there would be less resistance to writers writing bad things about Jesus in their text. That's why you
Right.
see the Babylonian. That makes a lot of sense. Oh, Pinch just joined the membership. Thank you for that, Pinch. By the way, now that you've joined the membership, you will have access to all the exclusive content that I'm going to put out from here. When I get back, when I edit these videos, you'll be able to see them. So just keep that in mind. Thank you for joining. And let's get back to this. So I'm interested in this whole idea of this, that in the North, that there's people like, all right, let's back it up for a second. When you look at the Septuagint, it's translated in the 3rd century BCE, and all of a sudden, out of Egypt and out of the Greek world, you get these people like Philo, Aristobulus of Alexandria, and these people are, they love Judaism, they love Moses, they love the laws, but they also love Plato, they also love Aristotle, they also love, Orpheus. There's Orphic fragments from there's Jewish Orphic fragments, Sibylline oracles. Where what is your stance on this type of thing? And what do you think this is what Christianity eventually comes out of, maybe?
So everything in the Talmud opposes Hellenism. I mean, Hellenism, like where does that word even come from? It's named after the Greek god Heleno, who happened to be a male. But of course, everything Greek was dark and dirty to the Jewish people because it meant assimilation, and therefore, Philo of Alexandria, a Jew from Africa who visited the land of Israel frequently, he's he's like no one studies him in the religious world unless you're an academic scholar because he's considered completely heretical. So he's fusing it together. He lived incidentally right when Christianity means he was born in 20 BC. He died in the 50s. He died when Paul was writing his letters. So he lived right through the whole thing.
He's
So that's,
venerated by the church. Venerated. Like
yeah.
his theology is heavily drawn from by
Right,
the
right. The
gospel.
logos, the prologue of John takes that comes that's straight out of Philo.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
who gets it from Plato as well and other people. Other
Right. I pointed out to you last night, and when we were together, I knew our time was short, and I was very careful to do triage to only mention things that were important. And I mentioned to you about just the man's jacket, how the buttons are on the right side and the holes are on the left. And I showed you Hasidic Jews. I said, we're going to walk up to a Hasidic Jew and you can see it's reversed. They deliberately won't even dress that way and they reverse where the button and the hole is because
right.
it's a statement of we will not conform. There's no, one of the things that blew your mind away is that there's no theological difference between us, except they're dressing in black and white and wearing the very unique is a statement of saying that we are separate. Incidentally, the word Pharisee comes from the Hebrew word perushim. Well, what does that word mean? The word means to be separate. That's exactly what the word means. Pharisees means, though literally means, it's an anglicized version of it, literally means those who hold themselves separate. That means we don't, that's the whole, I've never said this on air. It just came because of what you're saying. The whole word Pharisee, what does that mean? It means perushim. What does that word mean? It means those who hold themselves separate. That's what it means. So the whole point of Judaism is to push back against the tides of change, and certainly Greek and everything like that. That's the whole point of the Pharisees. And that's why that's the gold standard. They sit in the seat of Moses, whatever they tell you, follow. It's very unlikely that was invented because it's very pro-Pharisee. But that's the key. That's why Paul claims to be a Pharisee. Why does he claim to be a Pharisee? Because if he said you were a Sadducee, that would mean nothing.
Yeah.
That's it.
I want to hold that thought for a second. Just want to read some of these super chats. Elon, I just met you the other day here in Israel. Thank you for the super chat. It was also nice meeting you. It was great. It's great seeing people who watch Derek or me, or you seem to came here for, and looking for Derek, and it was nice to meet you. Definitely. Thank you for that, and thanks for the happy birthday. I appreciate that. It's good to see you in the chat. Let's see. There's one more too. Vesper. Thank you for that super chat, Vesper. I appreciate it. Rabbi Singer, could Jesus be the Messiah ben Joseph, mentioned in the Talmud and Book of Zechariah, one of the four craftsmen of dual Messiah prophecy?
Absolutely not. The Mashiach ben absolutely not. But this is spit out by Christians, and so the Mashiach ben Yosef is in the tractate Sukkah of the Talmud 52b, and the Mashiach ben Yosef is the person who is a warrior who's fighting in the final battle where the nations come up against Jerusalem, Gog, and in the battle, although the Jewish people are completely successful, see Zechariah 12, 8, and 9. Like, just please do this. Like, look it up for yourself. It says God's going to strengthen the Jews. They'll be like David, even like the angel of the Lord of hosts. And the enemies are defeated. The enemies of Israel in the future are defeated. But one guy gets killed in the middle of this battle, and it's a tragedy. Okay. And he gets killed. Read the next verse. And they will mourn over him as one mourns over a firstborn son. And the mourning will be like what happened in the valley of Megiddo. What happened in the valley of Megiddo? That's where Josiah was killed by an Egyptian archer. So what happens in Mashiach ben Yosef is prior to the Messiah comes as a war against Jerusalem. In the battle, a great person dies, and his death in battle causes everyone to cry over him, and that triggers a repentance, which then allows the Messiah to come in based on Isaiah 59:20. The Messiah can only come to a nation that has repented. So if that's really exactly opposite, Jesus of Christianity is exactly opposite. The Jews didn't succeed. The Jews were crushed under the heel of the empire. So, and Messiah, the son of David, didn't come. But what happens is Christians are in a lot of trouble. I don't envy them. And they've got to make sense of what do you have a dying Messiah? There's no mention of that in Tanakh of a dying and rising Messiah. The Christian Bible says it's in the scripture. The Christian Bible says in Luke 24, 44 through 46, says literally that the idea that the scripture says that the Messiah would die and rise on the third day, according to the scripture. And the same thing you find in 1 Corinthians 15. And there isn't, it's complete phantom, completely made up. So what do? You go to the Talmud and you just make up stuff. It's totally different. And please, you can go to the Talmud online. There's a website that has all of you could just read it for yourself.
Yeah, that's a good point. And not to mention that Joseph doesn't show up in any Christian text until like like past 70. Like there's no he's
Right.
not
Until
mentioned at all.
Matthew. Right.
So I think it's clearly that Joseph sort of I don't even know if he I don't know. I'm not sure about that. But maybe there was a guy named Joseph who was the adoptive father. Who knows? All I know is
Well,
I don't
there's
know.
no father there. I'll tell you something to you. I never said on air, I don't think. But Galatians 4:4 says that Jesus was born according to law to a woman according to the law. Like, what do you mean born to a woman? So Paul's not mentioning a virgin birth, but why is he only a woman? So you could say that Galatians 4:4 is advancing the idea that only a Jewish mother conveys Jewish identity. Or there was just no father known to Paul, because Paul is not mentioning a virgin birth of anything, nothing unusual about Jesus' birth, but he's mentioning only the mother. You go figure it out.
Yeah. I want to go back to the Pharisee thing because people don't understand that in the Gospels it depicts Pharisees and Sadducees as if they're like basically the same thing. They're always the Sadducees and Pharisees did this. They lump them together, but they're not at all even close to the same. In fact, they don't mention the Essenes at all.
No,
But the Pharisees are probably the most Hellenized out of the three main branches.
the least that you mean the Sadducees.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
Sadducees are the most Hellenized, right? Of course,
yeah. That's what I said. Yeah.
right.
So okay, so what do you think? What is what should these as rabbinic Judaism come out of? Essenes, you think?
No, no. Rabbinic Judaism is Pharisaic. That's nothing's changed. You, we went and saw a scroll last night. That's not a Masoretic text, and we're able to read it. You're going to the Israel Museum to this. I think you're going there. You're going to see text thousands of years old. You'll be able to read it. No, we are direct Orthodox Judaism. Just the term is coined Orthodox Judaism. That's only a couple centuries old. The Sadducees differed from the Pharisees, both spiritually and politically. Both of them are really important. Josephus talks about this. He describes 6 different sects of the Jewish people. The main was the Pharisees, Orthodox Jews. But the Sadducees rejected the oral Torah. rejected entirely. They're called Sadukim. That's the real name, after a fellow named Sadok who developed this idea. And they also did not believe in an afterlife, in the physical resurrection of the dead, which is very Greek, because the Greeks didn't believe in a physical resurrection. In fact, to them, it was insane. They couldn't, that was a thing about the Jews they really didn't like. Cicero, in his sixth volume of his Republic, writes about this. Even though the Greek Romans had a fairly positive view of Jews, they just couldn't stomach the idea that Jews believed in a physical resurrection. They thought it was insane because it went against everything they thought of. So the Sadducees, that's exactly what Paul was. Paul was, there's no resurrected physical resurrection, it's a spiritual body. So the Sadducees believe what the Greeks believe, and that is that this spirit lives on, but there's no physical resurrection at all. The Pharisees are exactly what Orthodox Judaism believes today. That is, in the physical resurrection, as prophesied in Isaiah 26:19, Daniel 12:2. So they're different spiritually, completely. Politically, the Sadducees were in cahoots with the Roman Empire, and the empire trusted them. They also controlled the temple. They were dominant in the temple. No doubt, because of that corruption in the temple, that a group we know about, the Essenes, from primarily Josephus, Pliny the Elder, but they broke away and went to the Dead Sea area, and that area was destroyed in 68. So the Sadducees were very close to the empire. The empire trusted them. The money, the taxes were collected, were kept in the temple by the Sadducees, looked over it. That's why banks to this day are built in those Roman columns, because that's where monies were kept, in the temples, which people wouldn't dare touch. So they were in cahoots with the empire. So they were like really on the bad side, and they were very corrupt. So spiritually they were corrupt, and politically they were in cahoots with the empire.
Okay, so let me ask you this then, because the temple gets destroyed. Before the temple gets destroyed, Jesse Florist goes in and steals a bunch of money from the temple, and then it starts the war. And then when the war actually does break out, Titus and his father Vespasian, they're actually both Titus Vespasian, they have the same name. Anyways, they sweep through Israel, and they defeat this Vespasian in the north, come down to Jerusalem, but they spare, according to the text, a couple texts, Talmud too says this, they spare Yavni, and the Talmud says Yavni and its sages. Aren't those the Pharisees too?
Right, those are the Pharisees, but they spare them. Why? Because there's an encounter between, here it was, the leader of Rome, and a man named Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, who was one of the authors of the Mishnah. Huge, huge.
Right.
So they are said to have met. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says to him, addresses him as though he's already emperor, and he wasn't. He was just general of the Roman Empire. So he was in general in charge of destroying Jerusalem. Yochanan ben Zakkai they snuck him out of Jerusalem by putting him in a casket and then bringing him out as a dead body, because no dead body can be buried inside the old city. I didn't mention that, because priests have to go there. So he gets out. He then says to the Roman general, who speaks to him as though he's the emperor, and he goes, "Why are you talking to me that way?" He says, "Because you are." And suddenly word comes in, you've been made emperor. And therefore he says to Yochanan ben Zakkai, what do you want? Like, just and he says, he makes a few requests. One of them is that, give me Yavna and the sages, preserve them, because Judaism had to be preserved. Jerusalem was lost. There was no way it could be sustained. There was nothing left, and they felt that of course, Judaism had to be preserved. So give us the north, let us stay there, and let Torah and Judaism continue there. So that was not only Pharisaic, that was the movement from Jerusalem to the north, which is pregnant with all these houses of study. Tiberias, is today one of the four holy cities of the Jewish people. That's where the Mishnah was written. But in the first century, as I mentioned, it was a thoroughly Roman city. There were no Jews to be found. In the time of Jesus, no Jews were in Tiberias unless they were totally off. So that's what happened. So ultimately, that's how Yavna was preserved. The study of Torah was preserved, although Jerusalem, the heart of the people, was destroyed.
That's a very interesting story because that I mean, what a change that is in just the fabric of the Mediterranean world just changes because of these events. You know, it's a new chapter in the world actually after that.
It seems like, Neil, that Jewish existence is always on a razor edge. Like it just what really would have required for the Jews to have disappeared like every other nation. We were always living on the edge of a razor blade, on the edge of a knife's edge, you know? And what would it have taken, for the Jews, all of the Jews to have been destroyed? One third of the Jews were destroyed three-quarters of a century ago. So we were always living on that knife's edge, but somehow we're there. The relic of the empire is there as these pillars in Jerusalem, but the Jews are playing there. Kids are playing there. Yeah, that's what it is.
Wow, that's
Right.
fascinating. And so, last thing I want to talk about is this: after the Bar Kokhba revolt, there really is like it seems like the it's law things are lost, but it's interesting that in the third century, yeah, third century, there's a pagan emperor who no, I'm sorry, fourth century. A pagan emperor comes in right after this is in between Constantine and Theodosius,
Mm.
and Julian
Julian.
Constantine's his name, and
Mm.
he decides that he wants to make Israel Jewish again. What happened to that? What is it because he got killed? Like, and why did
Yeah, he
what
only ruled for a short time. He ruled from what 361 to like just a couple years, and he
yeah,
was gone. They took him out. But it's so interesting. So here you have an emperor. So Constantine was a vicious anti-Semite, vile. In fact, Constantine is very important to Constantine that Easter would not be celebrated on when the Jews said it was Passover. And he sent a letter out. This is not like we have his letters I have it in one of my books that he said, how could it be that we should have such a vile, disgusting uh, people who killed God determined when our holiest day was? And that's how it happened in the Council of Nicaea. Everyone knows the Council of Nicaea for when the Trinity or the hypostatic union was enshrined as orthodoxy. But so they were Helena, vile anti-Semite. They all hated Jews. So what happened was he had Julian who reverts back to the Greco-Roman gods and rejects Christianity. And what does he do? He's nice to the Jews and says, "Go back. What do I care?" It's really very much like today. Like, where's the anti-Semitism coming from? It's not coming from people who worship stones in India who are Hindus. Like, I've never been called a Jew boy by a Hindu, like, right, or a Buddhist. Like in the Eastern religions, they don't even know it. Native American Indians don't care about Jews, right? It's specifically the Christians who really hate us. No one else. Well, that's the same deal. So the moment Julian jettisoned Christianity, then the anti-Semitism was thrown off with it. It's so simple.
it's just fascinating to me that Christianity claims to be this fulfillment of the Old Testament, and they venerate Isaac and Jacob and Moses, but they're the ones who won't let the Jews go back to their homeland. And then you get a pagan emperor, and he's the one who wants to put them back in their homeland, and then that fails. They have to wait till the world becomes secularized and the church loses its stronghold over people for them to actually get back. Obviously, that's not the only reason why. There's big
Right.
reasons why, but still, you get what I'm saying.
Right, and the Christians claim that the Christians who persecuted the Jews weren't real Christians, and this is so ludicrous because they were the real Christians. They were the devout Christians. Now, just think about this for a moment. If not being a real Christian is what triggers anti-Semitism, well, Julian was the ultimate non-Christian. I mean, see how this completely fails because it's just garbage in, garbage out. That means Julian was the ultimate non-Christian, so why didn't he hate us more? Like, why don't the Hindus hate us? I mean, if the Pope isn't a real Christian in the eyes of the Protestant Church, well then the Hindus certainly are not real Christian. Like, why don't they hate us? But they have no history of hating Jews, persecuting Jews, none of this stuff. So it's so transparent what's going on. And I say this to you, the viewer, the reason why you may not see this, or I may seem like I may seem like an amped up rabbi. You just haven't read the Gospels. If you just simply sat down and just open a New Testament and just start reading it, once you get into the storytelling, it's all just the Jews. I mean, no normal person could read the Gospels and walk away having a charitable, favorable view of Jewish people. And now there are Christians who do, but it's not because of their Christianity. It's in spite of their Christianity. It's because of John Nelson Darby's iteration of Christianity, the dispensationalism. But no more. Oscar Schindler was a German who was a member of the Nazi Party, but no one would ever say that Oscar Schindler, who's buried on the Mount of Olives, loved and saved Jews because he was a member of the Nazi Party. No, it was in spite of it. So, Corrie ten Boom was a Christian who saved Jews, God rest her soul. She never tried to convert us, but she's so exceptional. So, no, it's the Christianity that acts as the delivery system, the IV of Jew hatred. And Julian, brilliantly, as you mentioned, shows us what happens when you have a pagan emperor. Exactly.
Yeah, that's just the story of the Jews really is it's like no other. I mean, it really
Right.
is like you can't really point to any other people and say
Right.
their story stretches out from
Mm,
the beginning of recorded history basically till now, you know.
right.
And it's just
And you, Neil, I'm very proud of your Hebrew. I watch sometimes as you make out difficult words. And, when you see Hebrew text that date thousands of years back, you, Neil, are going to be able to read it and understand it.
yeah,
And I want to speak, our viewers are all English speakers, or else you wouldn't understand what we're talking about, right? Well, imagine if you would try to understand, if you heard Middle English or Old English spoken, you wouldn't understand it. You had no clue what's going on. You would not understand Chaucer. Forget about it. No chance, right? And how old is that? Right? We're going back to the medieval period, and you have no clue what's going on. It's like, oh, we're not doing a Jacobean English. That's what the King James written in. That's 17th century. I'm talking about go back to the 14th century English. You would have no clue. And here you, Neil, and I, Tovia, can go together, brothers in arms. We can go into a museum where the scrolls are kept, and together we can read the letters that were written and understand what they mean perfectly.
yeah.
Perfectly. Why? Because it's unchanging. That's the key of our peoples. We don't change. We preserve everything. We never forget, and we also never forgive. We're very loyal, but once we're betrayed, we'll never forgive our enemies, and we'll never forget what they did to us. We preserve everything. We're a people of history.
Wow, that's incredible. Well, this has been great. And I'm probably going to see you tomorrow again at some point. So
Yeah.
we'll do some more recording. Everybody stay tuned for that. I'm going to make sure because we got good cameras. I can't just upload them. We have to do the editing and stuff like that. So there's going to be some stuff coming out. Rabbi's going to be in the films, and yeah, there's a lot of stuff coming up. Anything else you want to say?
I'm looking forward to, taking you walking together through history. We're going to be doing that. I guess tomorrow you're going to be walking through history. Like we're walking through areas that make the Western Wall look modern. Going back deep, deep into biblical times, Assyrian Empire, Hezekiah, and then going back further in time to the patriarchs themselves. So that's very exciting. I'm very much looking forward to that. And I'll tell you, Neil, I'll never forget the face. It's all been filmed of you and Derek as the Western Wall came into view. I'm just telling you that so as a heads up. We were walking through the old city, and I said, "Okay, we're about 300 feet now." I said, "You see that? Right there is the Mount of Olives." You see, we went at night, and then bang, the whole thing came into view, and I just watched your face and Derek. It was very, very special. It's a very special experience. That's how I viewed it when I was 16, 17 years old for the first time, right at that ledge where
Yeah,
pow, it all just there it is, and just lights up.
because you see the pictures and the videos online, but when you see it in person,
Right, right,
it comes alive. It's right. You're
right.
there. You're part of it now. So
And it's
it's
not
definitely
just a
surreal.
relic, but are you going to be on Sabbath in Jerusalem? I don't know where you're going to be. When are
Uh,
you heading?
let's see when how many more days? No, that's the day we're leaving. That's the day we're going to
You're
that.
leaving on Saturday?
We're leaving about let's see, one tomorrow. Tomorrow's Thursday. We're still here. Then Friday, we're here one more day, and then Saturday, yes, Saturday,
So
yes,
you'll be in Jerusalem Friday night?
yes.
Okay, I'm gonna tell you on air what to do. Will blow your mind away. If you go to the Western Wall Friday night, if you do that, you will see thousands all packed, that whole area. So you saw last night there was maybe 1,000 people in the whole Western Wall complex, but you'll see the place will be shoulder to shoulder Friday night. It's very, very special. I
Oh,
strongly
definitely
encourage
got to
you.
film that. I'm definitely gonna film that.
Right,
And then Saturday morning, we go down to the desert,
right.
down to Masada, Petra, all that stuff. We're gonna see the south, south, south.
And when you go, no one else is going to tell you. So when you go to the Western Wall Plaza, if it's Friday night, if you go, and there could be 5 to 10,000 people there easily. Be careful with the camera because it's the Sabbath has begun for the Jews. So you wouldn't want to bring the camera loaded into the place where people are praying. You sort of put that away once you get that close. If
Yeah.
Sabbath has begun,
By the
so
way, last thing I want to ask you, in the desert at night, how does the sky look?
it looks the way the ancient world saw it, and that is you see the stars, here in Jerusalem, and as where you live in the United States, there's so much light pollution, but here it's, mm,
You can see the
you
Milky
know
Way.
well, yeah, I'm not an expert on this art, but
Yeah,
the greatest vision in the Torah was the one that Jacob had, where he saw the ladder that was on earth and it went up to the heaven. The idea that's conveyed there, and God is at the top, is that heaven and earth are connected against what the Gnostics believe, pushing back against what the dualists, the Zoroastrians believe, that they were separate domains. It's all united. And that's the feeling. I don't want to take this away from you. You're going to see it, and you're going to see the whole connection. You're going to be in the biblical place and look up at the stars. That's where it's dark, no light pollution, and then it's all going to come together. I don't want to take it away from you. You'll enjoy it.
well, I'm gonna capture that as much as I can. So,
Yeah.
and thank you for your time, and you
Oh,
reciting true
I'll see
gnosis.
you.